way down to deck. How you doing, guys?
Thank you.
It's like watching a film, but then all of a sudden we're in a film.
Roughly 5,000 metres above sea level. To give you an idea, that's about 700 metres on top of Kilimanjaro.
Race Osaka still going.
Endurance adventure athlete. I basically try and do adventures that are going to push me as hard as I can in environments that are challenging, and I try and do it with the mentality of an athlete. So I am looking at performance, I am looking at trying to push myself. I do a lot of training. I started off as a runner back in 2014, but since then I've kind of branched out a little bit, and during the time from then to now have covered nearly 31,000 kilometers of human-powered adventuring in 28 different countries. And I break it up into 4 different genres. I do cycle touring, which I've done just shy of 10,000 kilometers, and that includes cycling from Sao Paulo across South America to La Paz, going across the Paraguayan Chaco and over the Andes into Bolivia. And last year, cycling across Australia, which is a 4,000 kilometer cycle in 25 days. I do mountaineering, only started that last year. Since then, I've managed to do 6 peaks over 6,000 meters. Aconcagua, Chimborazo, Cotopaxi, Cayambe, Iliniza Norte and Bonete. And then wilderness hiking, which I did a thing called the Heiju Trail. If you don't know about it, it's in Utah. This kind of concept trail that links up national parks in Utah and Arizona, and absolutely thoroughly recommend it. And then running, which is my real passion. I've done 20,000 kilometers of running around the world. And I'm going to predominantly talk about my run from Vancouver to Buenos Aires this evening. But I've also, and actually really funny listening to Steph talking there, when I got back from running the Americas, the first thing I did was want to run in the UK. And so I went to Fort William and did the 3 peaks running, had a backpack on, climbed Ben Nevis, Snowdon and Scafell Pike in 13 days, 23 hours and 40 minutes. So that was kind of nice little parallel there. I also have run across Iceland, done a few running competitions and things like that. But that is not why we're here to talk about tonight. But if you have any questions about any of them at the end, you can jump on and let me know. So I thought I'd just touch a little bit on how I got into adventuring. You can see there's me looking grey on the right-hand side, and me more colourful now in my adventuring world. I normally spend quite a lot of time on this, but I'm just going to kind of skip through it a little bit. But back in 2014, I think a lot of people will either understand this feeling or be in it right now or have heard other stories, but I was working in the city doing a corporate job, and I was just basically a very unhappy person. And what I realized is that I've been basically spending, or kind of living my life in a way that I thought was what other people thought I should live my life, rather than doing what I actually wanted to do and what was my passion. And as a result of pushing away my passions and following the kind of what society telling me to do, I ended up in a place where I was very unhappy. And when you're unhappy, you look for things to grab onto. And mine was basically obsessively going to the gym and obsessively rehydrating in the pub afterwards. And I think the moment that kind of pivoted this whole change was one night, 3 o'clock in the morning. I was out with some friends in London. I was in the center of London. My house was in the west. My office is in the east. And I decided that, why would I go all the way home when I can go straight to work? And curiously, the next morning, I woke up in the bathroom at my work, lying on the floor, and I pulled myself up onto the sink and literally looked in the mirror and thought, you have to make a change in your life, or you're going to spiral into a place that you don't want to end up. So I looked around at all the people who inspired me, who were doing what I wanted to do, the kind of Ed Staffords, the Mark Beaumonts, the Sean Conways. I thought, why are they allowed to do what they do and I have to do this? And I realized it was because they had the courage and the kind of lack of fear to go into, to follow what they wanted to do and do whatever it took to get there. And I was hiding behind this job. So I made a decision right there that I was going to be like they were and take this big leap and become an adventurous person. And and that is kind of how Running the Americas was born. I was sitting in my office and I was like, right, I want to quit my job. I'm going to quit my job. Let's see, I have to probably be away for at least a year. What am I going to do with this year? I want to bring all my passions, because this is why I'm doing this. What are they? They're traveling, they're meeting people, and they're running. So I brought them together, 365 days. How many kilometers can I run? 30 kilometers a day. Gives me 11,000 kilometers to play with. And I literally went to a pub and sat down with a pint and thought about where could I go? Could I go around the world? And I admitted to myself straight away that I didn't have the skills, I didn't have the money, I didn't have the knowledge to be able to do that. And I was scared of doing that. I looked at going down through Africa to Cape Town, and again, there was just too many hurdles for someone who'd never done this before. So I looked across to America, and Vancouver to Buenos Aires seemed like two really nice places to go between. I put the details into Google Maps, and it came up with this trip that was 17,000 kilometers. And the good thing was that I only had to have 2 languages, English and Spanish, and I didn't need to have any visas. And while I didn't have the money, and I think you hear a lot from people who go, I was going to do this, but I didn't have the money. I had to get my head around that. So I looked at the map and said, okay, let's set some success points along this trip that allow me to at least start the trip. And then I will be able to, if I hit those success barriers, then hopefully the money and the support will come and I will be able to get to the end. So running the length of the United States, running to Panama, they were the first 2 big targets. So with that in mind, I think I finished my job on the 28th of July, and on the 14th of August, I found myself in Vancouver. This is how the trip ended up looking. So I ran down into America, down the west coast of America, like Big Sur, California and all that, into Baja, California, across the Sea of Cortez into Mexico, Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, Panama, and into Ecuador, and then across Colombia, Ecuador, then Peru, down the length of Peru into Chile, and then I took a left over the Andes and then down across Argentina and into Buenos Aires. Don't know if there might be a lag, I don't know, so hopefully things will catch up in a second. So I wanted to do this adventure solo and unsupported. So to do that, I'd have to have some way of transporting all my goods. A little bit of research on the internet. There's only 2 ways I could do this. Either a backpack, which really wasn't practical for these kind of distances and the amount of equipment I would need, or a baby stroller. And this is my baby stroller, which I named the Green Dragon. Basically, this has my tent, my cooker, my clothes, and all that kind of stuff. And anyone who's a parent will actually know that a lot of people think this looks really difficult, but once you get used to running with one of these, they're actually not that difficult. It does limit you to only being able to run on roads, but I absolutely love the stroller. It is actually just to my left over here. And I've just brushed it off because I'm actually looking at an adventure in a couple of years to run the length of Madagascar using the same setup. For sleeping, I really wanted to camp as much as possible, primarily because of money, because I couldn't afford to stay in nice hotels, but also because it gives you more of an experience of adventure. This photo here is actually on a military or Air Force testing base for bombing and shooting, and this is one of the targets, and this is where I camped one evening. But I was very open from the start that this was not a survival trip, this was a running trip. And I basically was, you know, if someone offered me hospitality, then I would take that, or if it was a cheap hostel, I would take that. Running was number one. But I did get to stay in some interesting places. I slept in potato sheds, industrial estates, and even a girls' fraternity house at Santa Cruz University, which didn't quite go as I was hoping it was going to go in my head. So the way I'm going to do this talk, I've done this talk a few times, I'm trying to get it into a very short amount of time, is I'm just going to pick a few moments from it, just to give you an idea of what the adventure's like. So the first day I'm going to talk about is 511 kilometers into the adventure. I'm on the border between Washington and Oregon, and this is the Astoria-Megla Bridge. It's the longest bridge of its type in North America. It's about 6.5 kilometers long. So on this day, I'd woken up and I couldn't walk when I woke up in the morning. I had an Achilles problem, which had been bugging me for a few days. And I set out, and I think after about 500 kilometers, you start to find this kind of drive inside you, which you just pushes you on every single day. And somehow, at the end of that bridge, I managed to reach that, which was 60 kilometers of running, basically with a very severe limp. And I arrived at the end of this bridge and the border, and the sun was going down, it was dark, and there was a campsite, and I went and approached them and they said, "You're not allowed to camp here tonight. This is residents only. You have to go somewhere else." So I approached the bridge, and there's a massive sign that says, "Pedestrians not allowed." And having done 60 kilometers, you see a sign that says, "You're not allowed." You look on your phone, and the alternative is 120 kilometers around a long way. And you're like, "No, I'm going to run across this bridge." It said bikes allowed. So I decked myself up with a head torch on the front, head torch on my ass, and I started running, pretending to be a bike as I ran across the bridge. As the town of Astoria got closer to me, I was feeling elated, and as I was coming up this bridge, I got onto the top, and then blue flashing lights started going, and a state policeman pulled me over and jumped out and said, "I'm terribly sorry, sir, you're not allowed to continue. It's illegal to be on this bridge." And this was my worst nightmare. So I walked up to him, I said, "Look, officer, I am terribly sorry, but I'm trying to run to Argentina. I'm doing it for charity. If you make me get in this car, then you're going to ruin this whole trip." And I really lent on him quite heavily emotionally. And in the end, when he found out about the charities, which I'll talk about a little bit later on, he was like, "Okay, fine, I'll tell you what I'll do. I will give you a police escort." And my first run-in with the police, I ended up running down this bridge, blue lights flashing into the town. And we got to the end. He took my details, but let me off. And it gave me a real sense of kind of that everything was going to be all right with the authorities and with people, because of the way that when people understand what I'm doing, they will actually get behind my adventure. One of the things I found when I was spending a lot of time alone, at this point I'm 3,310 kilometers into my adventure. I'm in Mexico, and this is Carlos the bear, and you can see him sitting there with a Tecate beer. He's sitting right here with a Heineken beer. His tastes have changed somewhat, but I was basically finding that I was quite lonely. I was speaking to myself a little bit, and you kind of, when you're aggravated or angry or frustrated, you need to talk to something. I was running one morning and I looked on a cactus and found Carlos impaled. I scrambled down, picked off Carlos and added him to my car. It's amazing just having a face that you can talk to, very much like in Castaway. This became my buddy, my companion, the person who helped me deal with the dark times. And from that point on, I basically went to sleep every night hugging a teddy bear, which is probably not the image people have of an adventurer. But it really shows that kind of even though you're doing these adventures, you do need to have these interactions with something. And I was really grateful that actually straight after this meeting, Carlos, I actually met a whole bunch of people from Alaska who pulled over to the side of the road at 11 in the morning. And when they found out what I was doing, beers turned out, and we all had this party, despite the fact that I had to run a marathon that day. But you end up meeting just the most fantastic people. And this whole trip was just based around meeting people, and the running really does take a back seat. Now 4,380 kilometers. I decided to run down Baja California rather than going down the mainland, which left one problem, which was getting across the Sea of Cortez, which separates the Baja California to mainland. And there were three options to get across the stretch of water, and that was flying or taking a ferry. And I thought that neither of them feel particularly in keeping with where I was on. Speaking to other travelers, I found out about hitchhiking by going down to the harbour and taking part in a daily radio show that goes on between all the boat owners. So I went down the first morning and they kind of run through their business, and then there's any other business. And it is ridiculous things like, does anyone have any horseradish sauce for our Bloody Marys? And then I pop up and say, well, I'm a British guy. I'm trying to run to Argentina. Will anyone give me a lift across the Sea of Cortez? And no one answered my call. The next day I went down again. I was warned that this could go on for 2-3 weeks. But luckily this big chap called Kev came up to me and he said, were you that chap who was asking for a lift? And I said, yeah, I was that guy. Can you help? He says, yeah, me and my son, we'll give you a lift over. And I asked him why he had decided that he would do this. And it turned out that he was a firefighter from Seattle. And when 9/11 happened, it was his job to go into the rubble and extract the dead firefighters from the rubble. And as a result of that, he ended up with PTSD. And that PTSD drove him to a place in life where he felt that he couldn't carry on and he was going to take his own life. Fortunately, he had friends around him who supported him and managed to persuade him to get help. And the reason he was down in Mexico was to kind of do his own self-therapy. And it was wonderful to be able to spend time on this boat with someone talking about male suicide when I was supporting a charity called Calm, which is the male suicide charity here in the UK. So it's bizarre when I look back on all the wonderful things that happened on my venture. Actually, little interactions like this with someone who enlightens you about something that you're passionate about is actually, for me, one of the biggest reasons to do adventures. A lot of people ask me about Forest Gump moments, and it took me 5,934 kilometers of running before I got anything even close to a Forest Gump moment. I'd be pulled over to the side of the road in just north of Puerto Escondido, and I bought a coconut, and the school kind of broke up for the day. And as I started running, this group of kids started chasing me, and I was immediately thought that this was going to end badly. However, this group stuck with me, and of the people you can see in front of me, the two closest to me and the two furthest away ended up running 10 kilometers with me from their school back to Puerto Escondido. I was slightly worried that the police or parents may see me running with their kids in the middle of nowhere and think this was wrong, but they all assured me that they were fine. But in the whole of my running trip, I think I ran with these 4 kids, 2 kids in Panama, 2 chaps in Peru, and then a whole bunch of people at the end. But on the actual adventure, only about 6 or 7 people. Illness is something that people wonder a lot about on adventures, and they kind of, did you get ill? Did you get injured? And I'm really lucky to say that of the 17,000 kilometers, I had Achilles problems at the very beginning. I had Achilles problems every time I had to stop for any prolonged amount of time. I got giardia when I went swimming in the Darien Gap in between Panama and Colombia. But the worst one was when I was in Nicaragua. I was in a little village called Somotillo, and there was another chap from Spain who was walking around the world, and he was coming north. And if I could get to a town 69 kilometers away, I was going to meet him. So I woke up in the morning, very, very warm. It's about 35, 40 degrees. So I got up at 5 and started running, made it 40 kilometers down the road, drank a Gatorade, 2 kilometers later, needed to go for a pee, stopped at the side of the road, went for a pee. 1 kilometer later, needed to go for a pee again. And it was the most excruciating pee I've ever had in my entire life and was bright red. And I didn't know what it was. And then the next kilometer, the same thing happened. Knowing that I had to get to this town and also knowing that there was nothing in between me and that town, I had to run 29 kilometers with this problem. I arrived in the town, luckily, met this chap, and then the next day, bizarrely, he was taking a day off, but I was so in this zone that you had to get up and run every single day that I, even though I had this problem, obvious problem, I got up and carried on the next day, made it 7 kilometers, and again, stopped, red, P. And I found this little sign that said Pharmacia. I walked down this little track and there was a doctor, and I walked up to him and said, look, I've got this problem when I pee. It's really, really sore and red. And I promise you it's nothing to do with sex, because I have not had sex for a really, really long time. He took me down to the end of, he went and got a jam jar, which you can see there, took me down to the end of the garden and said, right, here's a rose bush, pee here. And I was like, what? So I peed into this jar, handed it to him, and he took it into his house and came back. And it turned out that I basically was peeing blood and had cystitis. Luckily, he gave me some pills and told me to rest for the rest of the day, and I could carry on running the next day. And bizarrely, 2 days later, I was boarding down an active volcano in Leon in Nicaragua. But they were the only illnesses I had on the whole adventure. One of the kind of biggest physical challenges for me was getting from Central America to South America, because there is no road that runs from Panama to Colombia. There's the Darien Gap, which is about 100 kilometers of jungle. I'd love to say that I would love to have got across the Darien Gap, but my stroller was my excuse why that wasn't going to happen. I had a wonderful experience of trying to cross where I failed dismally, where I went to this little island on the coast of Panama and tried to hitchhike on fishing boats down the coast into Colombia. And I went to this extraordinary little island, which was tiny, could walk around it in 2 minutes. Not a single part of the island was not part of a house. And stayed there for 2-3 days until I realized that I was basically being taken advantage of, and my money was disappearing. And after a rather bit of a bust up, ended up back in Panama and had to fly to the border of Colombia, where I then had to take a motorboat along the coast of Colombia to a little place called, I've forgotten what it's called, a little village, Capugana. And then from Capugana, I then had to take another motorboat across to Turbo in the north of Colombia. And for me, this is the proudest part of my whole adventure. I'd just been back to the UK for my little sister's wedding, and everyone had asked me when I was going to finish. It was July, beginning of July, and I was rather arrogantly was like, oh, well, I'll be done by New Year's Eve. It's going to be great. I'll roll into Buenos Aires. When I arrived back in South America, I looked it up on the map, and it was 7,600 kilometers, and I had 181 days. And the maths worked out exactly at 42 kilometers per day, every single day, without a break for 181 days. So I kind of ambitiously set off trying to achieve this, and I will finish that story later. One of the things people ask a lot about is safety on adventures, and did you feel like anything bad was going to happen? And I saw the guys touching on it earlier. In the 17,000 kilometers on this adventure, and in every other adventure I've been on, I have never had a bad situation with a human being. However, when I approached Piura, between Piura and Chiclayo in the Sechura Desert in the north of Peru, I received an email from some cyclists saying, do not run this 200 kilometer stretch of road. We got held up at gunpoint and shot at. So just don't go there. I looked on the map. It was the only route. So I kind of realized I had no choice. So I woke up the next morning, feeling good as I started running out, and ladies started pulling me over and saying, you can't go down this road. You will die. And I was like, that's not very comforting. Carried on, and the little kids were sitting on the side of the road just going like this across their throats. And I was like, okay. And as I stumbled into the desert, it was the only time that I realized that the life decision I'd made how selfish that was as an adventurer, because as an adventurer, we make a decision that we will put our lives at risk and we will take on the challenge. And, you know, part of it is the adrenaline of the danger. That's what fuels us when we're doing these things. But that was the only time on this adventure when I sat there going, but what about my mother? And what about my sister? And what about people who love me? I'm not going to be here. They are going to have to deal with this. So I kind of got to these two policemen and they said, no, these guys are all lying. You'll be absolutely fine. And I ran out into the desert, and about 15, 20 minutes later, they pulled up in their car and said, actually, we've been doing a little bit of talking. This is really, really dangerous. You probably shouldn't be here. So they ended up giving me a police escort for free across the desert. I think on the first day, they were quite impatient. They kept leapfrogging. And we did 60 kilometers on the first day. And then that night they got to a place, there was a restaurant, they said, you will sleep there. I was joined by a cyclist who thought this escort was rather a good deal. So we'll wake you up at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning and then we'll carry on. 7 o'clock the next morning they were there, we carried on, we got to lunch. We thought we'd buy them lunch. There's like 3 or 4 restaurants in the whole stretch. We bought them lunch and then they announced afterwards that their jurisdiction had come to the end and they buggered off and left us. And we were like, well, we weren't scared before, but now that so we were left in the middle of the desert. Thankfully, nothing happened. I'm noticing time is ticking. This is one of the points of adventure that I think my biggest lesson that I learned from adventure. Before I left, a lot of people said, you can't do this. And I had to listen to people we're listing reasons. And the biggest reason was the Atacama Desert. You can't run across the Atacama Desert, 700 kilometers of nothing. And everyone was like, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this. And the 2 lessons I learned is, if you have a massive idea and other people don't think they can do it, they will tell you that you can't do it because their fear will tell you that you should have that fear. So you have to learn how to put aside other people's fear. And the second thing is, if you're looking at a massive adventure, I actually realized that the people were completely right. The person who started this adventure could not run across the Atacama Desert. I would have died. I would have been stupid. I'd have done something, I just wouldn't have been able to do it. But I'd run 14,000 kilometers across smaller deserts, across mountains and all that kind of stuff. So when I arrived at the Atacama Desert, I was not the same person I was when I started that adventure. I was a more experienced person, a more confident person. All the limitations I put on myself originally, I pushed through those barriers and I had become a much more confident person. That actually, when I arrived at the Atacama Desert, it wasn't a challenge, it was a welcome relief. It was something new, it was something different, it was a bigger challenge. It gave me the fuel to carry on running. But after 14,000 kilometers, I will admit, it gets a little bit boring running down a road. The next challenge was running across the Andes. I basically ran 700 kilometers across the Atacama Desert in 13 days, got to the San Pedro de Atacama, and my last big physical challenge was running across the Andes at 4,826 meters, the highest part on the road. You basically stand at the edge of the mountains, 2,500 meters. Your next checkpoint is 160 kilometers away. There is no water, no food, no civilization, just the Andes. You can't get water along the way. So this was my last big challenge. And as I kind of had to make a decision, do you take more stuff or do you go lighter and quicker? I went lighter and quicker. Successfully arrived at the Argentinian border, only to be told that you weren't allowed to cross the border on foot. And I sat there kind of going, you're what? I just crossed the Andes on foot. Luckily, one of the senior officers took me under his wing and led me through. So I'm speeding up a little bit because of time. And then I finally arrived in London. So I arrived in the whole thing of arriving in Buenos Aires on New Year's Eve. I did manage to do it. The only way I managed to do it was when I got to Argentina. I worked out that if I ran 60 kilometers every single day for 28 days without a break, I would make it to Buenos Aires. And when I arrived there, I flew back to the UK, arrived at Terminal 5, and then I ran from Terminal 5 into the centre of London and to my mother's loving hug. And that was the end of my adventure. And I don't know if there's questions or anything like that. I don't actually know what we do now.
Right. Can you hear me, Jamie?
I can indeed.
Right. Okay. Amazing. We're back on with you now. I'm not sure if I'm seen or not, but I'm gonna assume it is. Mate, that was unbelievable.
Yeah. Sorry, it's I do find it very hard sometimes to condense that journey down into any sort of time. It's very difficult.
It's absolutely fine. Don't worry. I mean, these are loose times for a start. And put it this way, I mean, could you see, just out of curiosity, could you see us while you were doing the, not what the feed can see, but can you see us when you were doing the feed next to you? So obviously me and Matt are still watching. I don't know how it works. Could you see us then, me and Matt?
I could, yeah.
The reason I ask that is because I'm looking at the feed and I'm doing exactly what the feed's doing. I'm going like this. Ow, eat. And the whole feed's doing the same thing because some of those stories are just incredible. And for us, you're the first person to come on today and it's done like a 30-minute presentation. Everyone's a Q&A also amazing well, but you just captured 30 minutes of that without an audience whatsoever, which is probably the most challenging thing to do here. So thank you so much for doing
I will excuse if I came across a little crazy, it's because I've been alone in my house for 45 days. So
I mean, I suppose it's a good point. I mean, I suppose you've done things like this run, which is such a solo attempt. I mean, stuff like lockdown, does it help? I mean, you know, you've been away for 45 days and that sort of thing. Is that a, you know, can you call on those experiences and that sort of thing in these times?
You know, one thing I've learned is, and then this maybe sounds a little bit unemotional, and probably that's why I do some of the stuff I do, but I don't miss people because we can always interact with people via telephones and stuff. That's always there. I miss my freedom. And I've become, I have packed and unpacked my bike about 20 times since I've been in confinement because I'm just desperate to get out. But as a kind of, I pull on the athlete side. So I'm now training 3 to 4 hours a day, every day, just trying to make sure that I'm ready and better equipped to be able to do my next adventure.
I mean, speaking of that, what have you got planned? If you're training every single day, you must have something in your locker. What are you thinking?
Well, so I'm a big believer in, and basically I say I'm going to do a lot of stuff and then sometimes I don't always do it. So I always write down those things and then I always go back to them and try and tick them off because I really believe if you say you're going to do something. So right now I've got a massive adventure next year, which I can't tell you what it is because it hasn't been 100% confirmed, but it's epic. And then when I finish that, I'm going to go to Nepal and do some trekking there just because I feel as an adventurous person, that's somewhere you should go. It's like kind of a pilgrim to the mountains and to the solitude. And then I want to run the north to south of Madagascar, which I tried to do last year, but I injured myself. I went all the way to the start and then I rational mind got the better of me. And then I want to swim the Thames because I've always said I want to swim the Thames.
Well, blimey, that was Britain's answer to Forest Gump, Jamie Ramsay. What a run. What a run. I mean, to run from Vancouver to Buenos Aires, 17,000 kilometers, really is, you know, that's no biscuit, mate. That's just
it's not. It's no biscuit. I wonder if he likes that name, Britain's answer to Forrest Gump. I mean, he is an endurance athlete. He's more like Britain's, or no, just like Britain's long distance Mo Farah.
Yeah.
He's a champ, mate. He runs really long way. He's not just a TV character.
No, yeah.
Don't put him on label as something made up, played by Tom Hanks.
He's a real McCoy, isn't he?
He's a proper athlete, yeah. He runs long way.
Out of interest, who do you reckon would win in a race? Run a race, him or Mo Farah?
It depends entirely on the distance, mate. I think if you put the track as the Americas, you'd have to give it to Jamie. Because although Mo is clearly next level, that's a long way to run.
Yeah.
And no amount of corn's going to take you there.
No. No, you're quite right.
So that was Jamie Ramsay. Really interesting talk. I enjoyed it. I'd like to hear more about his stuff in the future, mate. I think it's really interesting character to follow. I think he's going to do some crazy stuff.
Yeah, he said he's got a few irons in the fire, so to speak. He didn't really reveal too much. So if you do want to check out Jim Ramsay, check out the information in the bottom underneath this video where you can find out his website and that sort of stuff and where to follow him on what he does next. It's an unbelievable talk. Really enjoyed that. Next week, we're mixing up a little, aren't we, mate? We're making a little bit of food.
Yes, we're going back to Baba Ganoush town with Kieran Jethworth. That's going to be a corker. I really enjoyed this one. It was very different. I think we'll definitely do something like it again if we can one day, because it was just hilarious to have someone cooking Baba Ganoush live from Nairobi in our living rooms. I like the way he went out and hunted for the Baba Ganoush with his head torch in the pitch black. Well, not for the aubergine, not the Baba Ganoush. And then he came in and made it on the fire, on his gas-fired hob, which was just crazy stuff.
Impressive stuff, right?
I'm going to have a go at it this week, mate.
Yeah,
and hopefully next week's video you can see how it went.
Shall we bring our attempts to the video?
Yeah, I think we should. Yeah, we'll bring a Baba Ganoush to the video, yeah.
Yeah. All right, fine. That's settled then. Next week,
we'll do that.
We'll be back here with Baba Ganoush to recap on Kieran Jethworth's talk after everyone's watched it, and we'll try Baba Ganoush and reveal the talk after that.
Yeah, and obviously, if you're watching this on our YouTube channel, you can watch that right now on our Patreon page. So if you want to see how the Baba Ganoush went, you can just go on there now and have a look. Let me tell you, I've not done it yet, but I know it went badly. So it's probably quite funny.
Yeah. But the patrons are loving it. They keep saying. So
yeah. This early access stuff is just top notch, I'm sure. We've got a couple of people who've got themselves a sticker now, festival producer sticker. That's going to look good on their motorbikes or cars or bicycles or running trainers like Jamie Ramsay. I don't know where you'd stick it if you were a runner, maybe on a backpack. But yeah, they've got those. I think it's going well on the Patreon page. We've got 12 now, which is fantastic. All the money goes towards us, which is great too. And we use that money to make the Armchair Adventure Festival better next time. So it's a good thing to do, I think, Reese. What do you think?
Yeah, I think what you said there would probably be what I'd say.
Like we've always said, very little benefits to you, quite sizable benefits to us, but we get to put on the Armchair Adventure Festival again. So I always think it's a really good idea. There's 12 on there now. Let's see if we can get to lucky number 13 this week.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, so that was Jamie Ramsay, Kieran Jethworth next week, or right now if you want to go on the Patreon page.